mix of my experience, both as a scholar and as a business person in Malaysia since the last 6-7 years. So I would say it's quite a good mix of experience that I gained over the years. And moreover, I can tell you that coming from Italy, I come from a country which did the same mistakes that Malaysia is doing half a century earlier. So I know where is the end of the tunnel, and it is not a nice end. But I will try to see if there is a way in which Malaysia can avoid to go ahead on this path, this complicated path. So let's talk first about the bright side of the Malaysia business environment. When we talk about doing business here, in particular as a multinational company, I work for a Belgian multinational company in the agriculture industry. It's not only tax, but in general business environment. Talking about tax system, for sure Malaysia is not a fiscal paradise, strictly speaking. We have a corporate tax between 18 and 24%, a max personal tax of 28%, and a GST of 6%. So for sure we can say that Malaysia has a more oppressive system when compared with Singapore or Hong Kong. But on the other side, we must say that Malaysia tax system is much better than the one present in many European countries. If I would be now working in Italy, my personal income tax would be 44%, and GST in my country is 25%. In general, the average fiscal pressure on companies is 68%, which means that you work most of the year for the government, and the last part of the year you work for yourself. So don't be, let's say, too discontent with Malaysia. It's still much better than Europe. But as I mentioned before, the issue is not only tax system. For sure, Malaysia has a strong history of political stability. This is something bringing multinational companies, bringing business in Malaysia. When you think if setting up your local entity in Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and etc., apart from the taxation system, you look also at political stability, and for sure Malaysia has a history of political stability. Then a good system of incentive, and one of the first lessons of economics is that incentive matters. We have incentive on local manufacturing, in particular in agriculture and biotechnologies, also on high-end production. And in Malaysia there is a fantastic instrument called the Principal Hub. So let's say that if you set up here in Malaysia big-scale operations for serving all the region, then you face a tax holiday up to 10 years. This is fantastic, but in the long run not sustainable under the present condition, and as we will see shortly. Moreover, in Malaysia you have the possibility for a cheap and fast incorporation of a company. When I found myself in the obligation to incorporate companies here, I did it for an American multinational, for a Dutch multinational, and for a Belgian multinational. I find that I could have a company incorporated in less than 1 week. You go back to my country, you need 2 years to get the company settled down. Okay. So this is again something very attractive on the business environment. And you can have here a local entity 100% foreign owned. This is not possible, in example, in Indonesia or in the Philippines, where you must have a local partner. And usually the local partner is a privileged partner when you go to court, when you go to trial. Again, as was mentioned before, you have a very good system of infrastructures, a fair level of education. And something you have to consider nowadays is much cheaper to maintain an expatriate in Malaysia than in Singapore. So my company is much more happy to pay my salary here rather than placing me in Singapore, where probably only the amount of the rent would be like my present salary. And is a very strategic location as a regional hub, being part of many free trade agreements in the region. Once you have a business set up here, you can easily engage in business regionally at a favorable tax environment, favorable tax system. Again, you have a good ports and good airports, so for traveling people like myself, it's very easy to move around in the region. I summarized all these things in an article that was published on Forbes a few months ago. But then now, it's time to move to the dark side of the force, the dark side of doing business in Malaysia. Malaysia, as many developing countries, has a long history of government intervention. Since, let's say, at least the Mahathir era, the government perceived itself as an entrepreneur. And this is actually quite classical of the history of many developing countries, to have the idea, rooting back to the German historical school, that the initial development should be driven by government. And later on, only when the economic system is mature enough, we can have the market playing its role. But this view suffers of a philosophical implication. This means that government knows and decides what is good for the people. This, in the long run, creates a very bad dependent mentality. So the government will think like, government will take care of this. I don't need to bother myself because government is taking care from birth to death. This is very dangerous mentality for business. And in fact, after a few years, we find the government spending being much higher than tax revenues. So at the beginning, I would say that the role of government facilitated the modernization of the country, but now it's becoming more invasive. And this trend was already indeed predicted by economists like Mises and Hayek, which in many papers and books explain how a certain level of government control can be preserved only with rising level of government control. When the government step in order to preserve power, need to step up more and more in his control role. So this practical evidence is also supported by theoretical investigation. And as it was described before, we have recent alarming signals that could be a potential threat to business. One is the GST, but on this I have quite a peculiar view, as I will explain later. Price control, which is a very controversial issue. The withholding of taxes, that was just explained, and the payment of taxes in advance. This is also something that we already experience in Italy since a long time. When you go to fill your tax return, you pay taxes on your current income, and you pay an advance on the estimated profit of next year. This is very dangerous because it drains cash resources from the company. It's true that it's in advance, and later on you will get back this money, but of course, at the beginning you can face cash flow problems. And in countries like mine, when you are going to ask your money back to the government, the average time of reimbursement is 10 years. So now we find Malaysia to be at a crossroad between these bright and dark sides. Favorable condition and reasonable tax system and a good incentive systems that can attract foreign investors. But the alarming growing of regulation and role of government the excess of government spending and the idea to follow the bad path that were implemented by European countries. To follow Europe doesn't necessarily mean to be modern and advanced. If Europe is doing silly things, we don't necessarily need to follow. So this is something that probably in Asia is, in general in the developing countries, can be misleading. To follow advanced country is not always the right path. So Malaysia now should focus in working on preserving the positive points while fighting the bad temptations. Which are indeed the opportunity costs of government intervention? Why we should try to convince the government to step back? First of all, the rising role of government can be supported only with rising taxes. In order to do things, government, as everybody, needs money. And money comes only from tax revenues. And of course, this brings in a higher risk of corruption. Whenever there is more regulation, more request, there is always a higher risk of looking for alternative ways of doing things. Again, as I mentioned, Italy faced a similar path. It was an interesting investment place after World War II in the 50s and in the 60s, but nowadays is a hell. 68% of fiscal burden, 25% of GST, and 33% of people working in the government sector, widely speaking. In fact, we faced a big corruption earthquake in 1992 that wiped out the ruling party that was ruling the country since more or less 50 years. Do you see the similarities, the situation? Then, going more on a theoretical ground, it has to be said that in a complex society, government cannot know what is good for the people. Now I come to an example that Trisha mentioned because it touched me closely. You mentioned the closure of Tous les Jours, which is not actually a French bakery, it's a Korean group. They have an exotic French name. Being a coffee lover, of course, I tried all these coffees here in Malaysia, but they are a Korean agricultural group. They are my customer in Indonesia because they are owner of poultry farms. They open a business in Empire Subang where I work, and I was thinking, how long it will last? You have Coffee Bean, you have Starbucks, you have Loaf, you have La Bodega, you have Espresso Lab, all in the same buildings, all doing the same things. The only decent coffee is one in La Bodega. All the others are Starbucks rubbish. But why is good that Tous les Jours closed? And what these witnesses? It witnesses that when you operate in a free market, you can discover your mistakes. Of course, being in business, probably they should have realized that open the 10th coffee shop in the same location would be probably not a wise choice. But at least it didn't take long for them to realize that the entrepreneurial decision was not good to be sustained and they needed to shut down. If this was a government company, probably it would be taken years of accumulated losses to realize that the entrepreneurial choice was not a good entrepreneurial choice. And why I related this with the issue of complex society? Because in a complex society, the price system that arises from free market interaction, which means from the free inter-exchange of market players, suppliers and consumers, allow suppliers and consumers to discover their relative preferences, to discover what they actually want, what they actually need. And eventually, as an entrepreneur, I can discover that the customers at Empire Subang don't want coffee anymore, or they want it cheaper, or they want it at a better quality. in a free interaction, I can discover this. But if government is telling me how to do things and what is good for consumers in Suban, an example, then there is no possibility for the good outcome to come out, because this is oppressed by government intervention. So the issue is that there is no central authority in a complex society that can manage to absorb the full knowledge necessary to understand what is good for the people. This can emerge only from the people themselves exchanging information through that fantastic free system called price mechanism. Whatever different choice would be taken as a central plan would be the outcome of a pretense of knowledge, as Hayek was calling it. So, knowledge cannot be centralized, and any government plan arises from the pretense of assuming that instead knowledge can be centralized and managed. Why knowledge cannot be centralized? Because even if we assume that at a certain point government can have at disposal all the necessary knowledge to implement a sound economic plan, in the moment at which this economic plan is implemented, the knowledge is already changed. You know this because you interact in the market every day. You know that your preferences, your tastes, your discoveries are never at rest. And therefore, you need, in order to discover what is good for you, you need to be free to move around and to discover what is out there. Government cannot do that by definition because it's one, it's a central authority.
Carmelo,
Why?
you have about 5 minutes more.
5 minutes more, okay. So, the problem of centralized knowledge cannot be overcome by government because of the nature of knowledge. Knowledge is dispersed by definition in the mind of individual people. The Laffer curve that I quote in my presentation and is taken by the Mitchell paper was already mentioned. This is another of the most evident opportunity cost of government intervention. We all know, in example, Italy, where the fiscal burden is 70%. Of course, we don't have increasing tax revenues because instead of doing business, it's better I don't do anything because there is no incentive in doing business. So the income from the government doesn't increase, rather decrease. And this is, as Mitchell mentioned, even true in the case of indirect taxation, like taxation on tobacco, alcohol, this kind of taxation where, let's say, government play on the addiction trick. Whenever we raise the price of alcohol or cigarettes by taxation, consumer anyway will buy. That is not true. As Mitchell demonstrated, the black market will play the battle of revenge on behalf of the free market. So whenever tax burden becomes too heavy, the black market will take his beautiful revenge. And in the long run, in general, a general deadweight loss is unavoidable. I will not explain what deadweight loss is. You can drop me an email if you're interested in this. But in general, this means that taxes and regulations create disperse and miss occasion for business. So in general, the outcome of trade will be less than if we had taxation. In conclusion, where to go? I see a potential positive path for Malaysia only if we reduce the income tax, let's say to a reasonable level of 15%. Some benefit can come from GST. This is because I believe the country is excessively orientated toward consumption and not enough preserving its cash through saving. and GST can induce more saving available for future investment. But my strong point is that the good that has been done so far can be preserved only if the government decided to gradually step back from its direct intervention in the economic system. As far as they go ahead with government intervention, they will need more resources. More resources will need more taxes. More taxes will mean less business. So my final statement is, let the government step back and let the people step up. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Carmelo.